Hello there, and welcome to Bedtime Science. I am so glad you are here tonight. Wherever you are resting right now, I hope you are comfortable. I hope the room is quiet, the light is low, and the day has already begun to soften at the edges. Tonight, we are going to spend time with something that is, in a certain sense, closer to you than anything else in the universe. Your own mind. The invisible machinery of perception and memory and emotion and thought that processes everything you have ever experienced, generates everything you have ever felt, and makes you, in the deepest possible sense, who you are. Psychology is the science of the mind and behavior, and it is one of the youngest of the major sciences. Formal psychological research only began in the late 19th century, and yet in that relatively short time, it has produced findings that are genuinely astonishing. Findings about how memory actually works, which turns out to be nothing like how most people assume it works. About how decisions are made, which turns out to involve far less conscious deliberation than we believe. About how emotions are generated, how attention operates, how social environments shape behavior, how sleep and dreams relate to the waking mind, and how the brain constructs what feels like a seamless and continuous experience of the world out of what is actually a patchwork of perception, inference, and ongoing revision. What makes psychology particularly suited to a quiet evening like this one is that every finding in it is, ultimately, about you, about the workings of a mind like yours. And so each fact is, in its own way, a small invitation to notice something about your own experience, to look at the ordinary texture of being human from a slightly different angle and find it more interesting than it seemed before. So settle in. Let your body grow heavy and still. Let your breathing find its own pace. You don't need to hold on to any of this. Let it drift through your mind the way music drifts through a room, leaving something behind, even when you can't quite say what. And if this quiet kind of science helps you rest, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps more curious minds find Bedtime Science, and it helps this calm space continue to grow. Let us begin. We can begin gently, with the physical brain itself, and then move outward from there, into memory, attention, emotion, sleep, relationships, and the quiet mystery of consciousness. The mind is not one single thing. It is a living collection of systems, each doing its work in the background, most of it below the surface of awareness. The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons, and each neuron can form connections, called synapses, with thousands of other neurons. The total number of synaptic connections in a single human brain is estimated at around 100 trillion. To put that number in some kind of perspective, it is roughly 1,000 times greater than the number of stars in the Milky Way. The physical substrate of everything you have ever thought, felt, remembered, or imagined, every dream, every conversation, every moment of recognition, every flash of understanding, is encoded in the pattern of these connections. And the pattern is not fixed. It changes continuously throughout life, strengthened by use, weakened by disuse, restructured by experience. This is the principle of neuroplasticity, and it means that the brain you have tonight is not quite the same brain you had yesterday. One of the quiet miracles of the brain is that it is never completely finished. Even in adulthood, the nervous system continues adjusting itself in response to what you practice, what you notice, what you avoid, and what you repeat. A pianist's brain changes with years of playing. A taxi driver's spatial memory can become more finely tuned through the daily work of navigating a city. A person learning a new language gradually reshapes networks for sound, attention, and meaning. The changes are not magical or instant. They are slow, physical, and cumulative, built through repetition. This means that experience is not something that simply happens to the mind. Experience becomes part of the mind structure. Memory is not a recording. This is perhaps the single most important and most consistently misunderstood fact in all of psychology. Most people carry an implicit model of memory as something like a video archive, experiences recorded and stored, available for playback when needed. The actual mechanism of human memory is nothing like this. Every time you remember something, you are not retrieving a stored record. You are reconstructing the memory in the moment, reassembling it from fragments that are themselves subject to modification during the process of retrieval. Each act of remembering is also, in a small way, an act of rewriting. The memory that comes back to you has been subtly altered by what you currently know, what you currently feel, and what you currently expect. This is not a flaw in the system. It is the system, and it has real consequences for how we understand human testimony, personal narrative, and identity. Even very ordinary memories are stitched together from many different systems. The sites of an event may be stored through visual networks. The emotional tone may be linked through the amygdala. The place may be connected through the hippocampus. The meaning of the event may be shaped by language and personal interpretation. When the memory returns, these pieces have to be gathered again. This is why a memory can feel vivid and still be inaccurate, or feel faint and still be largely true. Confidence and accuracy are not the same thing. The mind can be certain about a reconstruction because certainty is also something the brain produces. The psychologist Elizabeth Loftus has spent decades documenting what is called the misinformation effect, the tendency for post-event information to contaminate memories of the original event. In a classic series of experiments, participants watched a film of a car accident and were then asked questions about what they had seen. Participants who were asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other reported higher speeds than participants asked how fast the cars were going when they hit each other. The word choice of the question altered the memory. More dramatically, Loftus and her colleagues demonstrated that it is possible to implant entirely false memories in research participants, memories of events that never occurred, through suggestion alone. The ease with which false memories can be created has profound implications for the legal system, where eyewitness testimony has historically been accorded great weight. The phenomenon of source monitoring error explains one of the more peculiar experiences of ordinary mental life. Sometimes you have a thought, an idea, or a piece of information, and you cannot remember where it came from. You feel certain you know something, but you cannot say whether you read it, heard it, saw it, or thought of it yourself. This happens because memory encodes the content of an experience more reliably than the context or source. The information is stored separately from the details about where it came from, and the source can be lost while the content remains. This is why people sometimes believe they thought of something original when they actually encountered it elsewhere. The source tag has detached from the memory. It is also why eyewitnesses sometimes confidently report seeing something that they actually only heard described. There is a category of memory that operates entirely outside conscious awareness, called implicit memory or procedural memory. When you ride a bicycle, type on a keyboard, or play a musical instrument, you are drawing on implicit memory, knowledge of how to perform a skilled action that is stored in a different brain system from the one that stores facts and episodes. The most striking demonstrations of implicit memory come from patients with severe amnesia. A patient who cannot form any new conscious memories, who wakes each morning with no recollection of having met their doctor before, can nevertheless be taught a new motor skill and will show improvement at that skill from session to session, even though they have no memory of ever having practiced it. The learning happens in a brain system that is intact even when conscious memory is destroyed. The phenomenon called the spacing effect is one of the most reliably demonstrated findings in memory research. Information is retained better when learning is distributed over time rather than concentrated in a single session. Studying something for 1 hour today and 1 hour tomorrow will produce better long-term retention than studying the same material for 2 hours today. The reason for this appears to involve the consolidation process that occurs during sleep and rest. Each time you return to material after a period away from it, the brain re-encodes it, strengthening the neural traces. This is why cramming for an examination produces knowledge that evaporates within days, while distributed practice produces knowledge that persists for years. The brain rewards patience. Sleep plays a critical role in the consolidation of memories. During sleep, particularly during slow-wave sleep and REM sleep, the brain replays the neural patterns associated with experiences from the preceding day. This replay appears to strengthen the connections that encode those memories, integrating them into long-term storage. Research has found that people who sleep after learning perform significantly better on memory tests than people who stay awake for the same period after learning. And the specific types of memories consolidated differ between sleep stages. Procedural memories, motor skills, and implicit learning appear to be preferentially consolidated during slow-wave sleep, while emotional memories appear to be particularly processed during REM sleep. The dreaming brain is not idle. It is performing essential maintenance on the archive of lived experience. Sleep also appears to help the brain decide what does not need to be kept. During the day, experience leaves countless traces: conversations, glances, background sounds, small worries, fragments of tasks, passing impressions. If the mind preserved all of them with equal strength, memory would become cluttered and unusable. Sleep helps sort this material, strengthening some patterns while allowing others to fade. In this sense, forgetting is not always a failure. It is part of mental hygiene. The sleeping brain is not merely saving the day, it is editing it. Dreams occur most vividly during REM sleep, but they can occur during other sleep stages as well. The content of dreams has been studied extensively, and several patterns emerge consistently across cultures and demographics. Most dreams are emotionally negative. People are more likely to dream about threats, losses, failures, and conflicts than about positive events. This negativity bias in dreams may serve a function. Some researchers have proposed that dreaming allows the emotional brain to process and contextualize threatening experiences in the relative safety of sleep, practicing responses and integrating difficult experiences into the broader narrative of the dreamer's life. Dreams are also overwhelmingly social. The vast majority of dream content involves other people. The dreaming brain is, in many ways, a social brain rehearsing its most important relationships. There is also a strange continuity between waking thought and dreaming. Dreams often feel bizarre because they combine memories, emotions, fears, and expectations without the full supervision of waking logic. But the material is not random in the purest sense. It is drawn from the concerns of the mind. A person may dream not about the exact problem they faced during the day, but about the emotional shape of that problem. Being unprepared, being chased, losing something, searching for a place that cannot be found. Dreams speak in the loose grammar of association. They are not always meaningful in a simple symbolic way, but they are rarely disconnected from the life of the dreamer. Lucid dreaming, the experience of becoming aware that you are dreaming while the dream continues, has been studied in laboratory settings with electroencephalography and other measures, confirming that it is a real, physiologically distinct state. In a lucid dream, the dreamer typically experiences a sudden increase in the vividness of the dream environment, a sense of heightened awareness, and the ability to exercise some degree of control over the dream narrative. Lucid dreaming appears to occur during a hybrid state of consciousness in which elements of waking brain activity, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, which is associated with self-awareness and executive control, are superimposed on the neural signature of REM sleep. Some people can learn to induce lucid dreams reliably through specific techniques, and researchers are exploring potential therapeutic applications. From dreams and memory, we can drift toward attention, the narrow doorway through which the world enters conscious experience. The brain receives far more information than awareness can hold, so it is always selecting, filtering, and guessing. What we notice becomes the world we think we are living in. The concept of working memory refers to the cognitive system responsible for holding and manipulating information in active awareness, the mental workspace in which you think. Working memory is limited in capacity in a way that long-term memory is not. Research beginning with the psychologist George Miller in 1956 established that most people can hold approximately 7 items, plus or minus 2, in working memory at any one time. More recent research suggests the true capacity may be closer to 4 items. This limitation has profound consequences for cognition. It is why complex mental arithmetic is difficult, why you can lose track of a conversation if it introduces too many new elements at once, and why complex instructions given verbally are so often only partially followed. The bottleneck of working memory shapes almost every aspect of conscious thought. Working memory is one reason calm pacing matters so much in learning. When too many ideas arrive at once, the mind cannot hold them all long enough to connect them. But when information is given with space around it, the brain has time to organize, compare, and settle. This is why a difficult subject can become understandable when it is slowed down and explained through familiar images. Intelligence is not only about how much a person can hold. It is also about how well information is arranged before it reaches the limits of attention. Attention is not a single faculty, but a family of related processes. Selective attention allows you to focus on one source of information while filtering out others. Sustained attention allows you to maintain focus over time. Divided attention allows you to process multiple sources of information simultaneously, though with costs to performance on each. The famous cocktail party effect describes the phenomenon in which your name, spoken quietly on the other side of a noisy room, will capture your attention even when you are deeply engaged in a conversation. This shows that your auditory system is, in some sense, continuously monitoring the unattended environment for personally relevant information, filtering it out before it reaches consciousness, but flagging specific signals for attention. Selective attention operates largely outside conscious control. The attentional blink is a fascinating limitation of the attention system. When 2 targets are presented in rapid succession in a stream of other stimuli, and when the second target appears within roughly 500 milliseconds of the first, people frequently fail to notice the second target, even though they clearly had the perceptual capability to detect it. The first target demands attentional resources, and while those resources are engaged in processing it, a second target arriving in the same time window is not processed at the same level of depth. The attentional blink illustrates that attention is a limited resource that takes time to be reallocated, and that the conscious experience of perceiving everything in the visual field is, in a fundamental way, an illusion. Change blindness is the striking tendency to fail to notice significant changes in visual scenes when the change coincides with a brief interruption or distraction. In the classic demonstrations, participants watch a film in which a major element of the scene, the color of an actor's shirt, the presence of a large object, even the identity of a person, changes during a brief cut. The majority of participants fail to notice the change. In real-world demonstrations, people have been caught up in a conversation and failed to notice that the person they were talking to was replaced by a different person during a brief interruption. Change blindness demonstrates that we do not actually perceive the world comprehensively and continuously. We construct a working model of the scene from selected samples, and large regions of what feels like perception are actually inference and assumption. Inattentional blindness, closely related to change blindness, is the failure to notice an unexpected stimulus in your field of view when your attention is fully engaged elsewhere. In the most famous demonstration, participants watching a video of people passing a basketball were asked to count the number of passes. During the video, a person in a gorilla suit walked through the scene, stopped in the center, beat its chest, and walked off. Approximately half of the participants failed to notice the gorilla. This is not because they could not see it. If asked to watch for gorillas, they would have seen it immediately. It is because their attention was engaged elsewhere, and the gorilla was not in the intended stream of processing. The experience of seeing, it turns out, depends heavily on what you are looking for. The psychology of perception has revealed that what you see is not a direct record of what is out there, but a construction, a model of the world built by the brain from sensory input combined with prior knowledge, expectation, and inference. Optical illusions work by exploiting the shortcuts and assumptions built into the perceptual system. The brain uses context, comparison, and past experience to make rapid inferences about size, color, depth, and motion, and these inferences are usually correct, but can be systematically wrong when the environment is constructed to violate normal assumptions. Color perception is particularly construction-heavy. The same physical wavelength of light will appear different colors depending on the surrounding context, the lighting conditions, and the state of the visual system. What feels like direct visual experience is, at a physiological level, a continuous act of creative inference. Predictive processing is one modern way of describing this active nature of perception. The brain is not passively waiting for the world to enter through the senses. It is constantly guessing what is out there and then correcting those guesses with incoming information. Most of the time, this works so smoothly that we never notice it happening. You do not see patches of color and then laboriously infer a room. You simply see the room. But behind that effortless experience is a rapid conversation between prediction and correction. The world you experience is not invented, but it is interpreted at every moment. The psychology of decision-making has been transformed by the work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, whose research demonstrated that human judgment systematically deviates from rational calculation in predictable ways. Their dual process theory proposes two modes of cognition: System 1, which is fast, automatic, associative, and effortless, and System 2, which is slow, deliberate, logical, and effortful. Most of what we do and decide is driven by System 1, the rapid, intuitive processing that generates instant impressions and snap judgments. System 2 is engaged when a problem requires careful analysis, but it is cognitively demanding and easily fatigued. Much of what feels like careful, deliberate reasoning is actually System 1 generating an answer that System 2 then rationalizes. The experience of reasoning your way to a conclusion is often, psychologically, an experience of justifying a conclusion you had already reached. Once perception is understood as construction, decision-making becomes easier to understand as well. The mind is not a cold calculator quietly weighing every option. It is a fast, embodied, emotional system trying to make good enough decisions under uncertainty, with limited time, limited attention, and a long evolutionary history behind it. This is why people often make decisions quickly and explain them slowly. The feeling of having a reason can arrive after the preference itself has already formed. You may choose one option because it feels right, then build a reasonable explanation around that feeling. This does not mean people are irrational in a hopeless way. Intuition is often useful because it compresses past experience into a rapid judgment. But it does mean that the story we tell about a decision is not always the same thing as the process that produced it. The mind is both a judge and a storyteller. Cognitive biases are systematic patterns of deviation from rational judgment that arise from the operation of the mental shortcuts, called heuristics, that the cognitive system uses to make rapid decisions. The confirmation bias is the tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information in ways that confirm pre-existing beliefs. The availability heuristic leads people to estimate the probability of events based on how easily examples come to mind, which means that vivid, emotionally salient, or recently publicized events are systematically overestimated in frequency. The anchoring effect causes people's numerical judgments to be pulled toward an arbitrary initial value, an anchor, even when that value is obviously irrelevant. These biases are not signs of stupidity or failure. They are the predictable outputs of a cognitive system built for speed and efficiency rather than perfect accuracy. The framing effect demonstrates that decisions are powerfully influenced by how options are presented, independent of their objective content. Kahneman and Tversky showed that people respond very differently to the same choice when it is framed as a potential gain versus a potential loss. Participants asked to choose between a treatment that would save 200 lives out of 600 versus a treatment with a 1/3 probability of saving all 600 lives overwhelmingly chose the certain option. The same choice framed as a treatment that would result in 400 deaths versus a treatment with a 2/3 probability of losing all 600 lives produced the opposite preference. The objective outcomes were identical. Only the framing differed. This asymmetry between gain and loss aversion, is one of the most robust findings in behavioral economics and has profound implications for how choices are presented in medicine, public policy, and everyday life. The sunk cost fallacy describes the very common tendency to continue an investment of money, time, or effort beyond the point where rational calculation would favor stopping, simply because of the resources already invested. Someone who continues to watch a terrible film because they have already paid for the ticket, or who persists in a failing project because of the time already spent, is committing the sunk cost fallacy. From a purely economic standpoint, past expenditures that cannot be recovered are irrelevant to current decision-making. Only future costs and benefits should matter. But psychologically, the felt obligation to justify past investment is powerful. The awareness of sunk costs reliably and predictably skews decisions in a direction that rational analysis would not endorse. Emotions are not reactions to events. This is one of the most important and most counterintuitive findings of modern affective science. The common-sense view of emotion holds that something happens in the world which causes a physiological response, a racing heart, shallow breathing, muscle tension, which you then experience as fear or anger or sadness. Some researchers in affective science, including psychologist and neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett, have proposed a different model, that emotions are shaped by predictions. The brain continuously generates predictions about what is happening in the body and in the environment, and emotions are the brain's interpretive labels for the patterns of physiological arousal it detects. The same physiological state, elevated heart rate, increased alertness, can be labeled as excitement, anxiety, anger, or anticipation depending on context and prior experience. In this view, emotions are constructed as much as they are triggered. They are acts of meaning-making as much as physiological events. A useful concept in emotion science is emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish one feeling from another with precision. A person who can tell the difference between disappointment, irritation, shame, loneliness, and fear has more options than a person who experiences all of them simply as feeling bad. Naming an emotion accurately appears to help regulate it. Language gives the mind handles. A feeling that is named becomes easier to observe, easier to understand, and often easier to bear. In this way, vocabulary is not only a communication tool, it can become an emotional instrument. This constructivist view of emotion makes sense of a phenomenon called misattribution of arousal. In a classic experiment, Male participants who crossed a frightening suspension bridge over a deep canyon were approached by a female experimenter who gave them her phone number and asked them to call if they wanted to discuss the study. Participants who crossed the scary bridge were significantly more likely to call than participants who crossed an ordinary bridge. The physiological arousal produced by fear was misattributed to attraction to the experimenter. The body was aroused for one reason. The mind assigned a different label to that arousal. This phenomenon has implications for everything from first dates to horror movies. The psychology of social influence documents the remarkable extent to which behavior is shaped by the presence, behavior, and expectations of other people, often in ways that operate outside conscious awareness. The bystander effect, the finding that individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when other people are present, is one of the most sobering demonstrations. In a well-known experiment, participants believed they were in communication with one or several other participants when they heard what appeared to be someone having a seizure. Participants who believed they were the only witness intervened significantly more quickly and more often than participants who believed there were other witnesses. The presence of others diffuses the sense of personal responsibility. If many people are watching, each individual feels less obligated to act. And because the mind is not only private but social, psychology eventually leads us from the inner world into the shared world. Other people shape what we notice, what we believe, what we feel, and sometimes even what we think we remember. The human mind developed in groups, and it still carries that group-shaped architecture tonight. Stanley Milgram's obedience studies, conducted in the 1960s, became one of the most discussed chapters in social psychology because they showed how strongly people can respond to authority. Participants were told they were taking part in a study of learning and were instructed to administer what they believed were electric shocks of increasing intensity to another person who was actually an actor. Many participants continued further than they themselves expected, not because they were unusually cruel, but because the situation carried the pressure of authority, procedure, and social expectation. The studies are difficult to hear about, and modern research ethics would not allow them to be conducted in the same way. But their central lesson remains important. Ordinary behavior is more dependent on context than we like to believe, and a wise understanding of the mind must include the power of situations as well as the power of character. Solomon Asch's conformity studies showed the power of social pressure in a quieter but equally revealing way. Participants were asked to choose which of three comparison lines matched a standard line, a task with an obvious correct answer. When alone, people answered correctly almost every time. But when they were placed in a group where everyone else confidently gave the wrong answer, many participants went along with the group at least once. Some did this because they did not want to stand out. Others began to doubt their own perception. The finding is not simply that people are weak. It is that the human mind is deeply social. We are built to use other people as information, and most of the time that helps us. But in the wrong situation, the same system can pull us away from what we can plainly see. Social identity theory, developed by Henri Tajfel and John Turner, proposes that a significant part of self-concept is derived from membership in social groups. People categorize themselves and others into groups, identify with some groups as in-groups, and compare these groups favorably with out-groups. This categorization process operates rapidly and largely automatically, and it produces intergroup discrimination even when the groups are entirely arbitrary. In Tajfel's minimal group paradigm, participants were divided into groups based on trivially irrelevant criteria. Even something as meaningless as their preference for Klee versus Kandinsky paintings. And they consistently allocated more resources to members of their own group than to members of the other group, even when this cost them personally. Group membership, however trivial, activates in-group favoritism within minutes. The fundamental attribution error describes the systematic tendency to overestimate the role of personality and disposition and underestimate the role of situational factors when explaining other people's behavior. If a colleague snaps at you, you are more likely to conclude that they are an irritable person than that they are having an unusually difficult day. If someone cuts you off in traffic, you attribute it to their character rather than to a possible emergency they are dealing with. The error is asymmetric. People tend to explain their own behavior situationally. I was tired, the situation was stressful, while explaining other people's behavior dispositionally. The same behavior looks like a reflection of personality when it is someone else's and a response to circumstances when it is your own. The Dunning-Kruger effect describes the finding that people with low competence in a domain tend to overestimate their own ability in that domain, while highly competent people tend to underestimate their relative ability. This is not simply about intelligence. It arises from a specific structural feature of incompetence. To accurately assess your own performance in a domain, you need the same skills that are required to perform well in that domain. If you lack those skills, you also lack the ability to recognize their absence. The expert in a field often knows enough to appreciate how much more there is to know. The novice does not yet know what they do not know. This asymmetry produces a distribution of confidence that is systematically disconnected from actual competence, with genuine expertise often wearing greater humility than novice certainty. The psychology of self-perception contains several important findings about how people come to know their own minds, a process that is considerably less direct than it feels. People often do not have privileged access to the true causes of their behavior. Research by Richard Nisbet and Timothy Wilson found that people frequently give explanations for their choices and judgments that bear little or no relation to the actual factors that influence them. Participants who preferred the right-hand item in a lineup of identical objects reported reasons for their preference: quality, softness, attractiveness, without realizing that position alone was driving their choice. The verbal report was an explanation constructed after the fact, not an accurate account of the process. We are, more than we like to think, narrators of behavior whose causes we do not directly observe. The concept of cognitive dissonance, introduced by Leon Festinger in 1957, describes the discomfort experienced when holding two or more inconsistent beliefs or when behavior conflicts with beliefs. When dissonance is experienced, people are motivated to reduce it, typically not by changing behavior, which is effortful, but by changing beliefs to bring them into alignment with behavior. In the original experiment, participants who performed a boring task for a small payment, $1, rated the task as more interesting than participants who performed the same task for a large payment, $20. The large payment provided a justification for the boring work. The small payment did not. So participants resolved the dissonance by deciding the work must actually have been interesting. Behavior shapes belief, often more powerfully than belief shapes behavior. Learned helplessness is a phenomenon first documented in research on animals and subsequently extended to human psychology. Martin Seligman and colleagues found that dogs exposed to inescapable electric shocks developed a passive, unresponsive behavior pattern that persisted even when escape became possible. They had learned that their actions had no effect on the outcome, and this learned lack of control generalized to new situations where control was actually available. In human psychology, learned helplessness has been linked to depression. People who have experienced chronic, uncontrollable negative events may develop a generalized expectation of lack of control that reduces motivation, impairs learning, and contributes to depressive symptoms. The perception of controllability, the belief that your actions matter, is psychologically fundamental. The Broaden-and-Build theory of positive emotions, developed by Barbara Fredrickson, proposes that positive emotions serve a different functional purpose from negative emotions. While negative emotions narrow attention and behavior towards specific threat-related responses, fight, flight, freeze. Positive emotions broaden the scope of attention and cognition, expanding awareness and promoting the exploration of new ideas, activities, and relationships. Over time, this broadening builds enduring personal resources, greater social connections, more flexible cognitive styles, better physical health, and more psychological resilience. This theory explains why positive emotions have such wide-ranging benefits beyond the immediate moment, and why cultivating positive emotional experiences is not mere hedonism, but a genuine investment in long-term well-being. The phenomenon of flow, described by the psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, refers to a state of complete absorption in an activity that is challenging enough to demand full engagement, but not so difficult as to produce anxiety. In flow, the sense of time distorts. Hours can pass in what feels like minutes. Self-consciousness fades. Effort feels effortless. Flow states are consistently rated as among the most satisfying experiences people report, and they occur across a wide variety of activities: playing music, rock climbing, writing, programming, playing chess, deep conversation. The conditions that produce flow are specific: clear goals, immediate feedback on performance, a close match between the challenge level of the activity and the skill level of the person. When these conditions are met, the experience of the activity transforms. After the social mind, we can return to the quieter inner systems that shape daily life: rest, wandering thought, habits, motivation, stress, and recovery. These are not dramatic subjects from the outside, but they are the hidden machinery of ordinary existence. The psychology of sleep deprivation reveals that losing sleep affects cognition in ways that are more pervasive and more insidious than most people recognize. Sleep-deprived individuals consistently underestimate their own impairment. After one night without sleep, performance on cognitive tasks is significantly degraded, but the person performing them often feels only mildly tired and believes they are functioning near normally. After several days of restricted sleep, even mild restriction, such as sleeping 6 hours per night rather than 8, cognitive performance degrades to a level comparable to complete sleep deprivation, but subjective feelings of sleepiness plateau, leading to a stable and false perception of adequate functioning. The combination of real impairment and subjective normalcy makes sleep-deprived cognition particularly difficult to self-monitor. The default mode network is a set of brain regions that are active during rest and mental wandering, when the mind is not engaged in a specific external task. For decades, this network was overlooked because neuroimaging research focused on task-related activity, and the resting brain appeared to researchers to be doing nothing of interest. It turned out to be doing a great deal. The default mode network is involved in mind-wandering, autobiographical memory, thinking about the future, considering other people's perspectives, and self-referential thought. It is the neural substrate of the thinking we do when we are not thinking about anything in particular: daydreaming, reminiscing, planning, wondering. Far from being idle, the resting brain is engaged in some of its most distinctively human processing. Daydreaming, for all its reputation as distraction, can also be useful. When the mind wanders gently, it can connect memories and ideas that are not usually placed side by side. A problem that felt stuck during direct effort may loosen when attention softens. This is why people often have ideas while showering, walking, washing dishes, or lying quietly before sleep. The mind is not absent in these moments. It is moving with less pressure, allowing distant associations to meet. Not every wandering thought is helpful, of course, but a quiet, unforced mind can sometimes find pathways that effort could not. Mind wandering, the spontaneous shifting of thought away from the current task to internally generated content, occupies approximately 30 to 50% of waking mental life, according to experience sampling studies that contact participants at random intervals to ask what they are thinking. This means that for roughly half of your waking hours, your mind is somewhere other than where your body is. A landmark study by Killingsworth and Gilbert found that, on average, mind wandering was associated with lower reported happiness than attending to the present activity, even when the activity being performed was not itself particularly enjoyable. The relationship between mind wandering and unhappiness appeared to be causal rather than merely correlational. Minds that wandered more frequently to negative or neutral topics were less happy, independent of what they were doing at the time. The psychology of habit formation has clarified what was long misunderstood about behavioral change. A habit is not simply a frequently performed behavior. It is a behavior that has become automated, triggered by a specific cue and executed with minimal deliberate intention. The habit loop consists of a cue, a routine, and a reward. The cue triggers the routine. The routine delivers the reward. The association between cue and routine is strengthened. Effective habit formation involves identifying the cue and reward clearly and making the routine easy to initiate. The popular claim that habits take 21 days to form is not supported by research. Studies have found that habit formation takes anywhere from 18 to 254 days, with an average around 66 days, and varies considerably depending on the complexity of the behavior and the consistency of the cueing environment. The neuroscience of reward and motivation involves a dopaminergic system that functions rather differently from how it is often described. Dopamine is frequently characterized as the pleasure chemical, but its actual function is more precisely described as the prediction and pursuit chemical. Dopamine is released not primarily in response to rewards themselves, but in response to the prediction of rewards, and it is particularly strongly released by unexpected rewards. When a reward is reliably predicted, dopamine release shifts earlier in time to the cue that predicts the reward. When an expected reward fails to arrive, dopamine levels drop below baseline, producing not simply the absence of pleasure, but an active negative signal. This system is why novelty is so engaging, why unpredictable rewards are so compelling, and why the psychology of addiction involves the progressive disruption of normal reward prediction. Curiosity has its own reward system. When people become curious about an answer, the brain becomes more receptive not only to that answer, but also to other information encountered around the same time. Curiosity opens a kind of mental gate. It increases attention, improves memory, and makes learning feel less like effort and more like exploration. This may be why the best teaching often begins with a question rather than a statement. The question creates a small gap in the mind, and the mind naturally wants to close it. The experience of pain is powerfully modulated by psychological factors in ways that have transformed the clinical understanding of pain management. Pain is not simply a direct signal from damaged tissue to the brain. It is a complex experience constructed by the brain in response to a wide range of inputs, including sensory signals from the body, but also attention, expectation, emotional state, and social context. The placebo effect, the genuine reduction in pain produced by treatments known to have no pharmacological activity, demonstrates that the cognitive appraisal of a situation influences physiological pain experience. Similarly, nocebo effects, negative outcomes produced by negative expectations, demonstrate that expecting pain to worsen can cause it to worsen through neural pathways that are real and measurable. The psychology of stress has distinguished between acute stress, short-term activation of the fight or flight response, and chronic stress, which involves sustained activation of the same physiological systems over weeks, months, or years. Acute stress is generally adaptive. It sharpens attention, increases energy availability, and prepares the body for action. Chronic stress, by contrast, produces cumulative damage across multiple physiological systems. The sustained elevation of cortisol associated with chronic stress impairs immune function, disrupts sleep, reduces cognitive flexibility, impairs memory consolidation, and contributes to cardiovascular disease. Particularly damaging is stress that is perceived as uncontrollable. Consistent with the findings on learned helplessness, the absence of perceived control amplifies the physiological stress response significantly. One of the gentler findings in stress research is that the meaning assigned to stress can change its effects. When people interpret physical signs of stress, a faster heartbeat, quickened breathing, alertness, as evidence that the body is preparing to meet a challenge, they often perform better and feel less overwhelmed than when they interpret the same signs as evidence that something is wrong. The body may be doing the same thing in both cases, but the mind's interpretation alters the experience. Stress is not always a signal of failure. Sometimes it is the body gathering energy for something that matters. Resilience, the ability to adapt and recover from adversity, is not a fixed trait, but a dynamic process that can be cultivated and supported. Research on resilience has consistently found that the most important protective factor is the presence of at least one stable, supportive relationship with a caring adult, particularly during childhood. Social support broadly, having trusted relationships, a sense of belonging, people to turn to, is the single most consistent predictor of resilience across multiple types of adversity. Other factors associated with resilience include a sense of self-efficacy, the ability to regulate emotions, and what psychologists call a growth mindset. The belief that challenges and failures are opportunities to learn and develop rather than evidence of fixed limitations. The psychology of trauma has been substantially revised in recent decades. Post-traumatic stress is not simply a matter of being exposed to a frightening or painful event. Many people who experience extremely difficult events do not develop lasting post-traumatic stress disorder, while others do. The difference depends on many factors: earlier life experience, the presence or absence of support afterward, how controllable or unpredictable the event felt, and how the memory was encoded by the nervous system. Traumatic memories are often less like ordinary stories and more like fragments, sensations, images, body states, and emotions that do not always feel safely located in the past. Many effective trauma treatments help the mind give the experience a clearer shape, so that the memory can become part of a life story rather than something that keeps returning as if it is still happening now. Post-traumatic growth is a genuine phenomenon that has been documented across many studies. The experience of positive psychological change following a struggle with highly challenging life circumstances. This growth takes various forms: a greater sense of personal strength, deeper relationships, changed priorities, a greater appreciation for life, and sometimes a deeper spiritual or philosophical perspective. Post-traumatic growth is not the same as resilience. It is not simply returning to a previous level of functioning, but moving to a higher level of psychological development in some domains. It is important to note that post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic stress are not mutually exclusive. People can experience both, and growth does not eliminate distress. But the recognition that adversity can be a genuine catalyst for psychological development has been an important corrective to models that view trauma purely in terms of damage. The psychology of motivation has distinguished between intrinsic motivation, engaging in an activity because it is inherently interesting, enjoyable, or meaningful, and extrinsic motivation, engaging in an activity for external rewards or to avoid punishments. Research has consistently found that intrinsic motivation is associated with greater creativity, deeper learning, higher quality performance, and greater psychological well-being than extrinsic motivation. More provocatively, Research by Edward Deci and others found that introducing external rewards for activities that people were already intrinsically motivated to perform could actually reduce intrinsic motivation, a phenomenon called the overjustification effect. When you pay someone to do something they were doing for free, you risk changing how they understand their own motivation. Instead of doing it because I love it, they begin to think they are doing it for the money. From stress and resilience, the science naturally opens into motivation and connection. The mind does not only try to avoid pain, it also moves toward meaning, mastery, belonging, and love, the deeper forces that organize a human life over time. Self-determination theory, developed by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, proposes that human well-being depends on the satisfaction of three basic psychological needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy refers to the experience of acting in accordance with one's own values and choices rather than feeling controlled by external forces. Competence refers to the experience of being effective and capable in one's activities. Relatedness refers to the experience of meaningful connection with others. These needs are universal across cultures, genders, and life circumstances. They appear in studies of children and the elderly, in individualist and collectivist cultures, in people with different personalities and different life histories. When these needs are chronically thwarted, well-being suffers. When they are satisfied, flourishing follows. The psychology of attachment, developed initially by John Bowlby and subsequently extended by Mary Ainsworth and many others, proposes that the close emotional bonds between infants and their primary caregivers form the template for all subsequent close relationships. The quality of early attachment, whether it is secure, avoidant, anxious, or disorganized, shapes the developing child's expectations about whether others will be available and responsive, and whether the self is worthy of care. These expectations, called internal working models, persist into adulthood, influencing the quality and character of adult romantic relationships, friendships, and parenting. Securely attached adults tend to have more satisfying, stable relationships. Adults with insecure attachment styles tend to show characteristic patterns of difficulty with intimacy, anxiety about abandonment, or compulsive self-reliance. The social baseline theory proposes that the human brain was calibrated by evolution for life in close social proximity to others, and that social connection is, at a fundamental biological level, a resource that reduces the brain's expenditure of energy and effort. Being with trusted others literally makes the world less threatening and effortful at a neural level. The load regulation system relaxes when social support is available. This is why social isolation is physiologically costly in ways that go beyond loneliness as a felt experience. Chronic social isolation is associated with elevated inflammation, disrupted sleep, impaired immune function, and significantly shortened lifespan. The need for social connection is not a preference or a luxury. It is a biological necessity as fundamental and as costly to neglect as the need for food and sleep. Touch is one of the oldest forms of regulation in the human nervous system. A calm hand, a hug from someone trusted, or even sitting close to a safe person can reduce threat responses in the body. The effect is not only emotional. Social touch can influence heart rate, stress hormones, and pain perception. Long before language develops, infants are regulated through warmth, rhythm, and contact. In adulthood, the same ancient systems remain. The body often understands safety before the mind has found words for it. Research on loneliness, defined not simply as being alone, but as feeling socially disconnected, has produced findings that are important and tender at the same time. John Cacioppo's work showed that loneliness affects the brain and body deeply. Lonely people may become more watchful for social threat, more likely to read ambiguous cues as negative, and more vulnerable to poor sleep and stress. The painful feeling of loneliness appears to function like hunger or physical pain. It is a signal that something essential is missing. The signal is meant to guide a person back toward connection. The difficulty is that when loneliness becomes chronic, it can make connection feel more threatening, creating a loop that is hard to break. This is why kindness, patience, and low-pressure social contact matters so much. The psychology of compassion and kindness has produced findings that challenge a narrow self-interest view of human motivation. Research by Sonia Lyubomirsky and others has found that performing acts of kindness toward others, what researchers call prosocial spending or prosocial behavior, reliably increases the well-being of the person performing the act, not just the recipient. In one study, participants given money to spend on others reported higher well-being than participants given the same amount to spend on themselves, regardless of the amount. The experience of contributing to someone else's welfare activates reward circuits in the brain. Humans appear to be designed to find genuine satisfaction in the well-being of others, a finding consistent with evolutionary theories of cooperation and with the long record of human mutual aid. The psychology of gratitude has emerged as one of the most robust findings in the positive psychology literature. Regular gratitude practice, deliberately identifying and reflecting on things one is grateful for, produces measurable increases in well-being, reductions in depression and anxiety, improved sleep quality, and stronger social relationships. The mechanisms underlying these effects are thought to involve several pathways. Gratitude directs attention toward positive aspects of experience, reducing the negativity bias that tends to dominate unaided attention. It reinforces social bonds by acknowledging the contributions of others, and it produces a temporary shift in mood that, when practiced regularly, may cumulatively shift baseline emotional tone. Gratitude interventions are among the most widely replicated findings in clinical positive psychology. The science of subjective well-being, happiness, as it is loosely but imprecisely called, has produced findings that consistently surprise people. One of the most robust is the phenomenon of hedonic adaptation. People have a strong tendency to return to a relatively stable level of well-being after both positive and negative life changes. Lottery winners, 1 year after their win, report levels of happiness very similar to their pre-win levels. People who experience major disability 1 year after the event report happiness levels higher than healthy individuals predict for themselves in the same situation. Major events, promotions, relationship changes, relocations, achievements, produce smaller and shorter-lived changes in well-being than anticipated. This is not entirely bad news. It also means that many of the bad things people dread also produce smaller and shorter-lived reductions in well-being than feared. The Peak-End Rule, documented by Kahneman and his colleagues, describes how people evaluate past experiences. Overall assessments of an experience are determined primarily by the most intense moment, the peak, and the final moments, the end, rather than by the average quality across the whole duration. A medical procedure that ends with a brief period of mild discomfort is remembered as less unpleasant than an objectively less painful procedure that ends abruptly at its most intense moment, even though by any objective measure the second procedure involved less total discomfort. This asymmetry between experienced utility and remembered utility has implications for how experiences should be designed in medicine, in entertainment, in customer service, whenever what people will remember matters more than what they experience in the moment. The psychology of time perception is one of the more fascinating areas of cognitive science. Time does not feel the same in all conditions. Time feels to slow dramatically during novel, fear-inducing, or highly engaging experiences, and to accelerate during familiar, routine, or automated activity. This relates to the rate at which the brain is encoding new memories. Novel experiences generate many distinct memories, which retrospectively feel like they occupied more time. Familiar experiences generate few new memories, and the undifferentiated time they occupy feels compressed in retrospect. This is thought to be why childhood years feel so long in memory. They were packed with novel experience, and why adult years feel shorter. They contain more routine and automation. Living in ways that generate more novel experience and more active engagement with the present may genuinely alter the subjective richness of time. This is one reason novelty can make life feel longer in memory. A day filled with new places, new conversations, and new impressions may feel long when remembered, even if it passed quickly while being lived. A routine day may pass comfortably but leave few markers behind. The brain measures remembered time partly by the density of memory. To live with more attention, more variation, and more presence is, in a sense, to give the future self more time to look back on. Research on the self-concept, the organized body of beliefs a person holds about themselves, has found that it is more fluid and context-dependent than the folk's psychological notion of a fixed self suggests. The aspects of self that are currently active, what researchers call the working self-concept, shift depending on social context, mood, and recent experience. People who have recently been outperformed by others are more likely to think of themselves in terms of their weaknesses. People in a new social group are more likely to think of themselves in terms of the characteristics that distinguish them from that group. The sense of a stable, continuous self is real as a psychological experience, but the content of that self shifts considerably more than the experience of stability suggests. And now the journey turns toward the self, the story a person tells about who they are, where they have been, what they want, and what their life means. Psychology shows that the self feels solid from the inside, but it is also flexible, responsive, and always being revised. The psychology of creativity has clarified that creative insight does not, in fact, arrive ex nihilo. The experience of sudden insight, the aha moment, is real and phenomenologically distinctive, associated with a specific pattern of brain activity, including a burst of activity in the right temporal lobe. But the insight is the end of a process, not a spontaneous beginning. Creative breakthroughs are consistently preceded by extended periods of preparation, during which the relevant knowledge and constraints are absorbed, incubation, during which the problem is set aside and the mind processes it outside conscious awareness, and illumination, when the result of the incubated processing suddenly surfaces into consciousness. The role of unconscious processing in creative thought means that taking breaks, sleeping on problems, and allowing the mind to wander are not obstacles to creativity, but essential parts of the creative process. The incubation stage of creativity can look like doing nothing from the outside, but internally, the mind may be testing combinations, loosening assumptions, and searching memory in ways that do not require conscious supervision. This is why rest can be productive for creative work. A walk, a nap, a quiet evening, or a night of sleep may allow a problem to reorganize itself beneath awareness. The sudden answer that appears later may feel like a gift, but it is usually the visible surface of hidden processing. The phenomenon of conceptual metaphor, developed by George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, proposes that abstract thought is largely structured by metaphors rooted in embodied physical experience. We understand argument in terms of physical combat. Positions are defended, attacks are deflected, weak points are identified. We understand time in terms of spatial movement. The future lies ahead, the past is behind us. We understand moral purity in terms of physical cleanliness. Research has found that people who have been induced to feel morally uncomfortable are more likely to want to physically wash their hands afterward, and that physically washing one's hands can reduce feelings of moral guilt. The body and the mind are not separate systems. The physical experience of having a body shapes the conceptual structures through which the mind operates. The psychology of language has revealed that the words and grammatical structures available in a language subtly influence the thought patterns of its speakers, a weak version of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Languages differ in how they categorize color, time, space, and causality, and speakers of languages with different categorical structures show corresponding differences in how they perform certain cognitive tasks. Russian speakers, whose language distinguishes between light blue and dark blue with separate basic color terms, can discriminate between shades at the light blue-dark blue boundary more quickly than English speakers. Languages that use absolute spatial terms, north, south, east, west, rather than relative terms, left, right, in front, behind, produce speakers with stronger spatial orientation abilities. Language does not determine thought, but it shapes the habitual channels along which thought flows. The psychology of sleep has moved well beyond the study of sleep disorders to illuminate the essential role of sleep in cognition, emotion, and physical health. Sleep research has shown that insufficient sleep makes the emotional brain more reactive while weakening the prefrontal systems that help regulate that reactivity. After poor sleep, ordinary frustrations feel sharper. Memories are encoded less efficiently. Creative problem-solving becomes more difficult. Immune function, hormonal rhythms, and metabolic regulation are all affected. Sleep touches almost every major system of the body, which is why losing it affects far more than simple tiredness. It is not passive downtime. It is one of the brain's most important forms of active care. The psychology of consciousness remains one of the deepest unresolved problems in science, at the intersection of philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology. We do not yet have a satisfactory account of why and how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience. The felt quality of seeing a red sunset, tasting coffee, experiencing grief. This is David Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness, and it is genuinely hard. Neuroscience has made enormous progress in mapping the neural correlates of conscious experience, identifying which brain regions are active during different conscious states. But identifying the correlates of consciousness is not the same as explaining how consciousness arises from neural activity. The question of what it is like to be a brain, why there is something it is like to be a brain at all, remains open. Consciousness is also intimate in a way that makes it difficult to study. You can observe someone else's behavior, measure their brain activity, and ask them what they experience, but the experience itself is private. No instrument can directly show the redness of red as it is felt from the inside, or the exact texture of remembering a childhood room. Science can approach these questions from many sides, and it has made real progress. But the fact that there is an inner world at all remains one of the strangest facts about reality. The psychology of meaning is increasingly recognized as a distinct and important dimension of well-being. Research by Michael Steger, Martin Seligman, and others has found that the sense that one's life is meaningful, that it matters, that it has direction and purpose, is associated with greater psychological well-being, better physical health, greater resilience in the face of adversity, and greater longevity. Importantly, meaning and happiness are not the same thing. Activities associated with meaning, raising children, pursuing difficult creative work, caring for others, often involve significant difficulty, effort, and sacrifice, and may reduce momentary happiness while increasing the sense that life is worthwhile. People who report high meaning in life are willing to endure more difficulty and uncertainty in service of goals they consider important. The orientation toward meaning, rather than toward pleasure or comfort, appears to be among the most powerful predictors of psychological flourishing. Mindfulness, the practice of deliberately attending to present moment experience with acceptance and without judgment, has been the subject of several thousand research studies in the past 3 decades, with findings that are broadly supportive of its effects on psychological and physical health. Regular mindfulness practice has been associated with reductions in depression, anxiety, and chronic pain, improvements in attention, working memory, and cognitive flexibility, changes in the structure and function of brain regions associated with attention and emotional regulation, and improvements in immune function. The neural mechanism appears to involve training the attentional system to release habitual patterns of rumination and automatic reactivity and return to direct experience. What is being trained in mindfulness practice is, at its core, the ability to notice what the mind is doing and to choose where to place attention. Mindfulness does not require the mind to become empty. That misunderstanding is one reason many people think they are bad at it. In practice, mindfulness begins when thoughts are noticed rather than followed automatically. A worry appears, and instead of becoming the whole world, it becomes a mental event. A sensation appears, and instead of being ignored or fought, it is observed. This small shift creates space between experience and reaction. The mind still produces thoughts, because that is what minds do. The training is in learning not to be carried away by every one of them. The psychology of self-compassion, treating oneself with the same kindness, understanding, and acceptance one would offer to a close friend in difficulty, has been found to be a more effective foundation for psychological well-being than self-esteem. Self-esteem is contingent on success and favorable comparison with others. When these conditions are absent, self-esteem becomes unstable and is associated with defensiveness, narcissism, and fragility in the face of failure. Self-compassion, by contrast, is not contingent on performance. It is offered unconditionally, precisely in the moments of failure and difficulty when self-esteem tends to collapse. Research by Kristen Neff and others has found that people high in self-compassion show greater emotional resilience, less anxiety and depression, more motivational persistence after failure, and greater psychological well-being than people high in self-esteem. Self-compassion is sometimes mistaken for self-excuse, but the research suggests almost the opposite. People who can respond to failure with kindness rather than contempt are often more willing to take responsibility, try again, and persist. Harsh self-criticism may create a feeling of discipline, but it also tends to produce avoidance, shame, and fear of failure. A kinder inner voice does not mean lowering standards. It means creating an internal environment in which learning can continue. The mind grows better under conditions of honest safety than under constant threat. The discovery of mirror neurons, a class of neurons that fire both when an animal performs an action and when the animal observes the same action being performed by another, has generated enormous interest in the neuroscience of social cognition. Mirror neurons were first documented in macaque monkeys and have been inferred to exist in humans from neuroimaging data. They are thought to play a role in action understanding, imitation learning, and empathy, the ability to understand and share the mental and emotional states of others. The mirror neuron hypothesis of empathy proposes that understanding others' emotions involves a simulative process in which the observer's own emotional circuits are activated, allowing the observer to feel something analogous to what they are observing. The emotional resonance of watching someone cry, of flinching when another person is hurt, may involve these mirror systems. At this point, the science becomes especially human. The mind is not only a machine for solving problems. It is also a system for feeling with others, telling stories, finding beauty, forgiving, comparing, belonging, and becoming. These softer subjects are not less scientific. They are simply more intimate. The psychology of self-disclosure, the process of revealing personal information to others, has been found to be associated with significant well-being benefits. James Pennebaker's research on expressive writing found that asking participants to write for 15 to 20 minutes about their deepest thoughts and feelings regarding a traumatic or stressful experience over 3 to 4 consecutive days produced lasting reductions in depression, anxiety, and physical health problems, and improved immune function. The process of translating emotional experience into language appears to facilitate the cognitive integration of difficult experiences, reducing their intrusive emotional power. The act of narrating an experience, giving it a coherent structure, a context, a beginning, and an end, changes its relationship to ongoing mental life. The neuroscience of social pain has found that the experience of social rejection activates many of the same brain regions as physical pain, including regions of the anterior cingulate cortex that process the distressing or aversive quality of pain. In a brain imaging study, participants who were excluded from a simple computer game showed activation in these pain-processing regions that correlated with their self-reported distress. Follow-up research found that acetaminophen, a common over-the-counter pain reliever, reduced both self-reported social pain and neural activity in the pain-processing regions during social exclusion. The experience of being rejected hurts not only metaphorically, but in ways the nervous system treats as deeply significant. The psychology of awe, the emotion experienced in response to things that are vast, extraordinary, or in some way beyond current frameworks of understanding, has been found to have distinctive effects on both cognition and well-being. Awe experiences tend to produce a decreased focus on the individual self, a reduction in impatience and time pressure, an increased interest in connecting with others, and greater creativity and openness to new information. Research has found that people who experience more awe in their daily lives report greater life satisfaction, more curiosity, more generosity, and greater feelings of connection to others. The effect of awe on the self-concept is particularly interesting. People who have just experienced awe represent themselves as smaller, less central, and more connected to the world around them. The psychology of character and virtue, once the province of philosophy and religion, has been taken up by psychologists who study what they call character strengths, positive traits such as curiosity, gratitude, humor, perseverance, kindness, and integrity. Research by Martin Seligman, Christopher Peterson, and others has found that identifying and using one's signature strengths, the character strengths that feel most authentic and most energizing, is associated with significant increases in well-being and reductions in depression. The exercise of using a signature strength in a new and different way each day for a week produced increases in happiness and reductions in depressive symptoms that were still detectable 1 month later. Character strengths are not simply nice qualities to have. They are psychological resources whose active engagement appears to promote flourishing. The psychology of social comparison, the process by which people evaluate their own opinions, abilities, and circumstances by comparing themselves to others, was first described by Leon Festinger in 1954 and has since been extensively researched. People engage in upward social comparison, comparing themselves to those who are better off or more capable, and downward social comparison, comparing themselves to those who are worse off or less capable. Upward comparison can serve as inspiration or produce envy and reduced self-esteem, depending on whether the comparison target feels similar and the gap feels surmountable. Downward comparison can boost mood and self-esteem temporarily, but is not reliably satisfying as a long-term strategy. Social media has intensified social comparison processes by providing a continuous stream of curated upward comparison targets, the highlight reels of other people's lives, and research has found that passive social media consumption is consistently associated with reduced well-being, particularly in adolescence. The study of personality has converged on a model known as the Big Five, or OCEAN model, which describes personality variation along 5 broad dimensions: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These 5 dimensions capture an enormous amount of the variance in human personality and have been replicated across cultures, languages, and methods of assessment. Each dimension represents a spectrum rather than a type. Most people fall somewhere in the middle of each dimension rather than at the extremes. Personality traits are substantially heritable. Twin studies suggest that roughly 40 to 60% of the variance in Big Five traits can be attributed to genetic factors. But personality also shows genuine change across the lifespan, with people generally becoming more conscientious, agreeable, and emotionally stable as they move from adolescence into middle adulthood. Personality is neither fixed nor infinitely malleable. The phenomenon of emotional contagion describes the automatic, largely unconscious process by which people absorb and share the emotional states of those around them. When you are with someone who is anxious, your own body may become slightly more tense. When you are with someone calm and warm, your own system may begin to settle. This transmission occurs through facial expression, posture, tone of voice, rhythm of speech, and small signals too subtle to notice consciously. It can also occur at a distance, through writing, messages, and online environments, because the human mind responds not only to faces but to emotional tone. We are more porous than we imagine. The moods around us do not simply remain outside us. They can become part of the atmosphere of the mind. The neuroscience of trust has found that the neuropeptide oxytocin plays a central role in modulating trust between individuals. Participants who inhaled intranasal oxytocin showed significantly greater willingness to make themselves financially vulnerable to another person in a trust game, compared to participants who inhaled a placebo. Oxytocin is released during positive social interactions, including touch, eye contact, and shared positive experiences, and appears to reduce the vigilance and threat monitoring activity of the amygdala, making social approach easier and social risk-taking less aversive. Oxytocin is not simply a bonding chemical. However, research has also found that it can increase in-group favoritism and out-group suspicion, and enhance the formation and expression of fear-based social memories under certain conditions. Its effects are context-dependent and nuanced. The psychology of the placebo effect has matured significantly beyond the early view of placebos as inert treatments that work only in the absence of real physiological effects. Research has documented that placebo effects involve genuine neurobiological mechanisms. Open-label placebos that patients know are placebos, produce significant improvements in irritable bowel syndrome, cancer-related fatigue, and chronic back pain. Placebo analgesia is blocked by naloxone, a drug that blocks opioid receptors, confirming that genuine endogenous opioid release is part of the placebo pain relief mechanism. Placebos can be conditioned. A person who has previously responded to an active treatment can subsequently respond to a placebo given in the same context. The brain, given the right expectations and contextual signals, can produce real physiological changes that alleviate real symptoms. The psychology of self-regulation, the capacity to control impulses, direct behavior toward long-term goals, and manage emotional responses, is one of the most important predictors of life outcomes across multiple domains. Walter Mischel's famous marshmallow studies found that children who could delay gratification at age foreshowed better outcomes decades later on measures of academic achievement, occupational success, social functioning, and health. The mechanisms underlying self-regulation involve the prefrontal cortex, which matures slowly throughout childhood and adolescence, and the capacity for reframing, mentally representing a tempting object in a different way, focusing on its abstract rather than its immediate sensory properties. Mischel found that children who succeeded in delaying gratification were not typically those who were best at suppressing thoughts about the marshmallow, but those who had learned to redirect their attention elsewhere. Research on the relationship between sleep and creativity has found that our EM sleep in particular appears to facilitate the kind of flexible, associative thinking that underlies creative insight. Studies have found that people who are allowed to sleep, particularly when the sleep period is rich in our EM sleep, perform significantly better on creative problem-solving tasks that require making distant associations between concepts. The sleeping brain appears to engage in a form of information processing that relaxes the constraints of waking logical thought, allowing connections between distantly related concepts to form. Anecdotes about creative breakthroughs occurring during sleep or in the hypnagogic state between waking and sleep. Kekulé's vision of the benzene ring, Mendeleev's dream of the periodic table, are consistent with this research, though such accounts should of course be treated with appropriate skepticism about their accuracy. The experience of being seen and understood, what psychologists call the experience of feeling mentalized or feeling felt, is one of the most fundamental human social needs and plays a central role in psychological development and well-being. Daniel Stern's research on mother-infant interaction found that when a caregiver accurately attunes to an infant's emotional state, matching its intensity and quality through facial expression, voice, and touch, the infant shows regulated, positive affect and increased social engagement. When this attunement is absent, disrupted, or misattuned, the infant shows distress. Across development and into adult life, the experience of being accurately perceived and responded to by another mind remains deeply important. People report feeling most emotionally regulated in the presence of someone who truly understands them, not because that person solves their problems, but simply because being seen changes the experience of difficulty. The psychology of goals has distinguished between approach goals, pursuing positive outcomes, and avoidance goals, avoiding negative outcomes. Research consistently finds that approach-oriented goals are associated with greater well-being, more positive emotions during goal pursuit, greater persistence, and better outcomes than avoidance-oriented goals. A person exercising to feel stronger and more energetic is pursuing an approach goal. A person exercising to avoid gaining weight is pursuing an avoidance goal. The motivational experience of the two is very different, and the psychological costs of avoidance orientation, chronic vigilance for the thing being avoided, frequent experiences of failure defined as the presence of the negative outcome, accumulate over time. Reframing avoidance goals as approach goals, where possible, appears to be a psychologically beneficial move. The psychology of forgiveness has been studied in clinical and experimental settings with findings that consistently support its benefits for the person doing the forgiving rather than the person forgiven. Forgiveness does not require condoning a harmful act, reconciling with the person who caused harm, or abandoning a just claim for accountability. It involves releasing the sustained anger, resentment, and negative feelings that keep the wound active and costly. Research has found that practicing forgiveness is associated with reductions in depression and anxiety, improvements in cardiovascular health, better immune function, and greater relationship satisfaction. The person who forgives reduces their own physiological arousal in response to the memory of the transgression. Forgiveness is, among other things, a gift to one's own nervous system. The concept of psychological safety, first named by Amy Edmondson in the context of organizational research, describes the shared belief that a group or team environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, for speaking up, sharing ideas, admitting mistakes, and asking questions without fear of embarrassment or punishment. Edmondson found that teams with high psychological safety performed better on complex tasks, learned more effectively from mistakes, and were more innovative than teams with low psychological safety. even when controlling for the ability level of individual team members. Google's extensive internal research on what makes effective teams, Project Aristotle, identified psychological safety as the single most important factor distinguishing high-performing teams from lower-performing ones. The quality of the social environment in which people work matters enormously for what they are able to achieve. The neuroscience of empathy has identified two distinct but related components: affective empathy, the sharing of another's emotional state, and cognitive empathy, the ability to understand another's perspective and mental state without necessarily sharing their feelings. These two components involve different neural systems. Affective empathy involves the networks that process emotions in the self, including mirror neuron systems and the limbic system. Cognitive empathy involves the temporoparietal junction and medial prefrontal cortex, regions associated with mentalizing, the ability to represent other minds. High affective empathy without adequate cognitive empathy can produce emotional contagion and personal distress rather than effective compassionate response. High cognitive empathy without adequate affective empathy produces accurate perspective taking that may be used compassionately or, in clinical psychopathy, manipulatively. The psychology of beauty and aesthetic experience has found that aesthetic pleasure, the experience of beauty in music, visual art, literature, or nature, is genuinely distinct from other pleasures and involves specific neural circuits. Aesthetic experience typically involves the reward system, particularly dopaminergic circuits, but also strongly activates the default mode network, the network active during mind-wandering and self-referential thought, in ways that other pleasures do not. The experience of being moved by music, of feeling aesthetic chills, is one of the more distinctive human experiences and appears to involve the interaction of the auditory cortex, the reward system, and regions associated with emotional memory. Research has found that the capacity to experience aesthetic chills in response to music is associated with a stronger connection between the auditory cortex and the reward system. Some people appear neurologically configured to be more deeply moved by music than others. The psychology of procrastination has reframed it from a time management problem to an emotional regulation problem. Research by Fuchsia Sorois and others has found that procrastination is typically not about laziness or poor time management, but about the avoidance of the negative emotions associated with a task, the anxiety of potential failure, the boredom of the work itself, the self-doubt triggered by a challenging project. By not starting, the procrastinator gains temporary relief from those aversive emotions at the cost of future stress and poorer outcomes. The recognition that procrastination is primarily an emotional phenomenon rather than a planning failure has led to more effective interventions. Rather than focusing on scheduling and time management, effective anti-procrastination strategies tend to address the emotional barriers directly, reducing anxiety about starting, practicing self-compassion in response to failure, and cultivating the capacity to tolerate temporary discomfort. The next part of the mind's story is practical: how people begin, delay, continue, improve, and change. A great deal of psychology lives in this ordinary territory: the unfinished task, the habit loop, the goal, the small promise made to oneself, the next attempt after failure. The phenomenon of implementation intentions, simply and specifically specifying when, where, and how you will perform a behavior you intend to do, dramatically increases the probability that the behavior will actually occur. Research by Peter Gallwitzer found that forming an implementation intention, "If this situation arises, I will perform this response," links the intended behavior to specific situational cues, allowing the behavior to be triggered automatically by the presence of those cues rather than requiring deliberate recall and decision. Implementation intentions are particularly effective for behaviors that are frequently forgotten, that compete with other attractive activities, or that must be performed in the face of habitual competing responses. Simply deciding to do something is far less effective than deciding when, where, and exactly how you will do it. The psychology of narrative and storytelling reveals that humans are fundamentally story-processing creatures. Jerome Bruner distinguished between two modes of thought: paradigmatic thought, which is logical, analytical, and deals in general principles and abstract truths, and narrative thought, which organizes experience into stories with characters, intentions, complications, and resolutions. Both modes are important, but narrative thought may be the more primary and pervasive. Humans spontaneously impose narrative structure on experience, explain human behavior in terms of intentions and goals rather than causes and effects, and find meaning through story rather than through logical analysis. Therapy is, in large part, a process of revising the stories people tell about themselves, changing the narrative structure, adding new information, shifting the perspective from which events are interpreted. The psychology of flow states and optimal experience has produced a detailed picture of the conditions that make human activity feel most alive and most meaningful. Csikszentmihalyi's research found that the quality of experience is highest not during passive pleasure, watching television, eating, but during active engagement with challenging activities that match and slightly stretch current skills. The paradox of leisure is that people often feel worse during unstructured free time than during focused work, even though they consistently prefer leisure in the abstract. The feeling of flow, total absorption, effortlessness, timelessness, appears to be the mind operating at its optimal point, fully engaged, neither bored nor anxious, using its capacities to the full. The implications for how people design their activities, their work, and their leisure are considerable. The psychology of awe, wonder, and the sublime has recently been placed on a firmer empirical footing. Dr. Keltner's research has found that awe experiences, encounters with something vast that challenges existing mental frameworks, reliably reduce self-reported physical pain, increase feelings of having enough time, promote prosocial behavior, reduce self-focused cognition, and enhance well-being. Regular awe experiences in daily life, looking at the night sky, standing in a forest, listening to magnificent music, being in the presence of great human achievement, appear to provide a form of psychological reset, temporarily dissolving the preoccupations of the everyday self and connecting the individual to something larger. There is growing interest in awe as a therapeutic resource, both in the form of outdoor nature experiences and in the emerging field of psychedelic-assisted therapy, which reliably produces awe-like states that appear to facilitate profound psychological change. The psychology of implicit attitudes examines evaluations and associations that operate outside conscious awareness. Researchers have used reaction time tasks, including the implicit association test, to study how quickly people connect concepts with positive or negative meanings. The findings suggest that people can sincerely endorse one set of values while still carrying automatic associations shaped by culture, media, experience, and repeated exposure. This does not mean that a person is helpless before those associations, or that implicit measures tell the whole story of character. It means that the mind contains layers. Some are deliberate and reflective. Others are automatic and historical. Becoming aware of those layers is one of the ways people can bring behavior closer to their chosen values. The study of human development across the lifespan has found that the period of emerging adulthood, roughly from 18 to 25 years, is a distinct developmental stage characterized by identity exploration, instability, self-focus, a feeling of being in between, and a sense of possibilities that remains open. This stage, described by Jeffrey Arnett, is partly a cultural artifact of modern industrialized societies that extend the period before full adult roles are assumed, but it is also associated with genuine neurological development. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, impulse control, and long-term thinking, continues to mature into the mid-20s. This late-maturing prefrontal cortex is part of why adolescents and young adults are more susceptible to risky behavior, more impulsive, and more sensitive to peer influence than older adults, and also why they are often more creative, more open to novel experience, and more capable of dramatic personal change. Development does not stop when adulthood begins. The brain continues changing through work, relationships, loss, learning, responsibility, and age. People often imagine adulthood as a finished state, but psychology suggests something more fluid. Personality can soften, priorities can shift, emotional regulation can improve, old fears can become less dominant, new capacities can appear surprisingly late. A life is not a straight line from formation to maintenance. It is a long process of adaptation, and the mind keeps revising itself in response to what living asks of it. The psychology of humor has found that laughter and humor serve a variety of social and psychological functions beyond simple entertainment. Humor reduces subjective pain sensitivity, improves immune function through reductions in stress hormones, and increases interpersonal liking. People who make others laugh are consistently rated as more attractive, more intelligent, and more desirable as partners. Shared laughter between two people produces bonding effects mediated in part through endorphin release. The capacity to find something funny in the midst of difficulty, what Viktor Frankl called the last of the human freedoms, has been associated with greater psychological resilience and more effective coping with adversity. Humor involves a kind of cognitive flexibility, the ability to see the same situation from two incongruous frames simultaneously and find the gap between them delightful rather than disturbing. The neuroscience of meditation and contemplative practice has produced a substantial body of findings in the past 2 decades. Studies of long-term meditators, people who have practiced meditation for thousands of hours over years or decades, have found significant structural differences in brain regions associated with attention, interoception, and emotional regulation. The insula, associated with the awareness of body states, is thickened. The prefrontal cortex, associated with executive control, is more connected to the amygdala. The size of the hippocampus, associated with memory and emotional regulation, is increased. Even short-term meditation training, 8 weeks of mindfulness-based stress reduction, produces measurable changes in gray matter density, reduction in amygdala reactivity to stress, and improvements in attention that are still detectable months later. The brain changes in response to sustained contemplative practice in ways that reflect the specific skills being cultivated. The psychology of forgetting has found that forgetting is not simply the passive decay of memory traces, but an active process with important adaptive functions. Forgetting allows the memory system to remain agile, to prioritize relevant information over irrelevant information, to update outdated records rather than being paralyzed by conflicting versions, and to prevent the interference that would arise if every detail of every past experience remained equally accessible. Motivated forgetting, the tendency to forget emotionally aversive material, is a genuine phenomenon, though its mechanisms are debated. And the targeted forgetting of specific memories, when practiced, produces interference that also makes competing related memories harder to recall, a finding called retrieval-induced forgetting that illustrates how deeply interconnected memory traces are. Research on gratitude in the workplace has found that expressing genuine appreciation to others has significant effects on both the recipient and the expressor, and on the relationships between them. Studies by Adam Grant and Francesca Gino found that when a manager expressed gratitude to employees for their work, employees showed a 50% increase in the probability of contributing additional effort on the next task. And this effect was mediated by feeling socially valued, not simply by the pleasant emotion of being thanked. Gratitude expressed within relationships appears to reinforce and strengthen those relationships over time, creating what researchers have called an upward spiral of positive emotions and social connection. The psychology of expertise has clarified what separates exceptional performance from merely competent performance. Anders Ericsson's research on expert performers across domains, chess, music, surgery, sports, found that the distinguishing factor was not innate talent but deliberate practice. Highly focused, effortful training that operates at the edge of current ability, incorporates immediate feedback, and involves sustained effort to address specific weaknesses. The 10,000-hour figure popularized by Malcolm Gladwell was a simplification of Ericsson's findings. The actual relationship between practice and expertise is more complex than a simple hour count, but the underlying principle is well supported. Exceptional performance in cognitively and technically complex domains is built through years of effortful, well-designed practice, not simply through exposure or experience. What the expert has that the novice does not is not just more experience, but more deeply structured knowledge and more precisely calibrated automaticity. The psychology of expectations has found that expectations are not merely predictive states, but genuine influences on experience, behavior, and physiological response. Medical patients given detailed expectations about what sensations they will experience during a procedure report less pain and anxiety. Students told by their teachers that they have high ability show genuine improvements in performance, a phenomenon called the Pygmalion effect or self-fulfilling prophecy. Participants given a milkshake described as high-calorie and indulgent showed a steeper decline in ghrelin, the hunger hormone, than participants given the same milkshake described as low-calorie and sensible. Expectations literally change physiology. The label on the experience, the story we tell ourselves about what is happening, has real biological consequences. The experience of time pressure, the subjective feeling that there is not enough time, is one of the most pervasive and psychologically costly features of modern life. Research by Cassie Mogilner and colleagues has found that one counterintuitive antidote to time scarcity is giving time away, spending time on others rather than on oneself. Participants who spent time helping others subsequently reported feeling that they had more time available than participants who spent the same time on themselves or wasted it doing nothing. The effect appears to be mediated by a sense of efficacy and accomplishment. Doing something useful and meaningful with time makes it feel more expansive. The psychology of time abundance and time poverty has implications not just for individual well-being, but for how societies think about productivity, leisure, and the structure of work. The psychology of human attachment across the lifespan has found that the need for close, secure relationships does not diminish with age. Adults in midlife and old age who report secure, satisfying close relationships show better cognitive functioning, better immune function, better cardiovascular health, and greater longevity than those who are socially isolated or who report chronic relationship conflict. The quality of close relationships, particularly the degree to which people feel understood, valued, and accepted by their most important relationship partners, is one of the strongest and most consistent predictors of both psychological and physical health outcomes in adult populations. John Gottman's research on couples found that the ratio of positive to negative interactions predicted relationship stability with remarkable accuracy, and that what distinguished stable from unstable relationships was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of sufficient positive regard, interest, and repair attempts. The phenomenology of insight, the subjective experience of suddenly understanding something that was previously unclear, has been studied with neuroimaging and behavioral methods. Insight solutions to problems differ from analytical solutions not just in their subjective quality, but in their neural signature. Insight solutions involve a burst of high-frequency neural activity in the right anterior temporal lobe approximately 0.3 seconds before the person reports the insight. This neural event appears to reflect the sudden integration of information that was previously held separately, the moment of unconscious resolution becoming conscious. Problems solved by insight are remembered better than problems solved by analysis, are more often correct, and are reached more quickly once the impasse is broken. The brain does something distinctive when it suddenly understands, and we can now see what that something is. The psychology of envy distinguishes between malicious envy, the desire to pull down the person being envied, and benign envy, the desire to improve oneself to match the envied person. Both forms involve pain in response to another's advantage, but they motivate different behaviors. Malicious envy motivates undermining the envied person, while benign envy motivates self-improvement. Research has found that the type of envy activated depends partly on whether the advantaged person is perceived as similar to the self and as having achieved their advantage through effort rather than luck. Envy directed at someone similar who worked hard for their advantage tends to be benign and motivating. Envy directed at someone who seems to have simply been lucky tends to be malicious and corrosive. The subjective experience of envy is universally aversive, but its motivational consequences are highly variable. The psychology of sense of coherence, a concept developed by Aaron Aronofsky in his research on how people maintain health despite adversity, proposes that a pervasive, enduring, and dynamic feeling that one's internal and external environments are comprehensible, manageable, and meaningful is a fundamental health resource. People with a strong sense of coherence are better able to use available coping resources under stress, tend to appraise stressors as less threatening, and show greater resilience across a range of adverse circumstances. The three components, comprehensibility, manageability, and meaningfulness, are related but distinct, and Antonovsky considered meaningfulness to be the most motivationally central. Without the sense that the challenges of life are worth engaging with, comprehensibility and manageability offer insufficient protection. The deepest resilience resource, in his view, was caring about outcomes enough to want to manage them. The psychology of social norms has found that descriptive norms, what most people do, are more powerful behavioral influences than injunctive norms, what most people approve of. In a series of studies by Robert Cialdini and colleagues, hotel guests given towel reuse information framed around what most guests in that room did were significantly more likely to reuse towels than guests given information framed around environmental responsibility. Informing people that most of their neighbors pay their taxes on time produced greater tax compliance than messages emphasizing the importance of paying taxes. What people understand others to be doing is a powerful signal about what is appropriate and expected behavior, operating through the deep social learning mechanisms that humans, as highly social creatures, rely on for rapid behavioral calibration. The neuroscience of habit formation has clarified the role of the basal ganglia, a group of structures deep in the brain, in encoding and executing habitual behavior. When a behavior is first learned, it requires significant cortical engagement. The prefrontal cortex is heavily involved in directing attention and managing decision-making. As the behavior becomes habitual through repetition, control gradually shifts from the cortex to the basal ganglia, which can execute the behavior automatically without requiring deliberate attention. This shift to basal ganglia control is why habitual behaviors are so difficult to modify. The behavior is controlled by a system that does not interface easily with deliberate intention. And it is why context matters so much for habit change. The basal ganglia are highly sensitive to environmental cues, which is why changing the environment, moving house, changing jobs, altering a daily route, is one of the most effective ways of disrupting unwanted habitual behaviors and establishing new ones. As the facts gather, a larger pattern begins to appear. Human psychology is not only about private thoughts inside separate individuals. It is about bodies, places, histories, groups, cultures, work, nature, language, and time. The mind is personal, but it is never isolated. Research on compassion fatigue, the gradual reduction in empathic engagement that occurs in caregivers who are repeatedly exposed to others' suffering, has clarified an important distinction between empathic concern and empathic distress. Empathic concern, feeling for rather than feeling with, is associated with prosocial motivation and approach behavior, and is more sustainable because it does not require the caregiver to personally experience the suffering of those they are helping. Empathic distress, fully sharing another's pain, produces personal distress and is associated with withdrawal and burnout rather than effective helping. Training programs designed to prevent compassion fatigue increasingly focus on cultivating compassionate concern, warmth, caring, and the motivation to help, while developing the emotional regulation skills needed to maintain this concern without being overwhelmed by it. The psychology of meaning-making in the face of loss has been studied through the lens of continuing bonds theory, which challenges the older view that healthy grieving requires detachment from the deceased. Research by Klass, Silverman, Nickman, and others found that bereaved individuals who maintained an ongoing inner relationship with the deceased through memory, conversation, ritual, or a sense of continuing presence showed better adjustment, not worse, compared to those who attempted complete detachment. The nature of the relationship with the deceased changes with time, but its continuation appears to be a normal and healthy part of the grieving process for many people. Grief that feels like it will never end is not necessarily pathological. It is often the expression of a love that does not end, finding new forms as the relationship continues in transformed ways. The psychology of intergroup contact has found that under the right conditions, direct contact between members of different social groups reduces prejudice and improves attitudes. The optimal conditions for contact to reduce prejudice, specified by Gordon Allport's contact hypothesis, include equal status between the groups in the contact situation, cooperative rather than competitive interaction, common goals, and institutional support for the interaction. When these conditions are met, contact consistently reduces explicit and implicit prejudice, increases empathy across group lines, and improves behavioral intentions toward the outgroup. The effects generalize beyond the specific individuals encountered. Positive contact with one member of an outgroup improves attitudes toward the group as a whole. Diverse environments that facilitate meaningful contact under favorable conditions are therefore not merely ethically preferable, but psychologically productive. Research on the relationship between nature exposure and psychological well-being has produced some of the most consistently positive findings in environmental psychology. Spending time in natural environments, forests, parks, coastlines, even simply viewing trees from a window, reliably reduces cortisol levels, heart rate, and blood pressure, improves mood, increases attention and cognitive performance, and reduces rumination. A study by Gregory Bratman and colleagues found that a 90-minute walk in a natural setting reduced rumination, repetitive negative self-focused thought, and reduced activity in a brain region associated with rumination compared to a walk in an urban setting. The mechanism appears to involve the restorative properties of natural environments, which effortlessly engage what Kaplan calls soft fascination, gentle, non-demanding attention, allowing directed attention to replenish. The concept of embodied cognition proposes that cognitive processes are shaped not just by the brain, but by the structure and state of the entire body, and by the body's interactions with the environment. This challenges the traditional view of the mind as a disembodied information processor that merely uses the body as a tool. Research on embodied cognition has found that people think differently when their posture is different. Adopting an expansive posture briefly before a social interaction changes hormone levels and produces more confident behavior. People judge the weight of objects as heavier when they are evaluating ideas as important, and rate strangers as having warmer personalities when they are holding a warm beverage. The weight of a clipboard makes the resumes on it seem more impressive. These effects are modest but real, and they indicate that the physical state of the body is continuously informing and shaping cognition in ways that the traditional mind-body separation would not predict. The psychology of meaning in work has found that experiencing work as a calling, as an activity that is both personally meaningful and a contribution to something larger, is associated with greater intrinsic motivation, better performance, higher job satisfaction, and greater subjective well-being than experiencing work as merely a job or even as a career. Importantly, the same objective work can be experienced as a job, a career, or a calling depending on how it is subjectively framed. Research by Amy Rozesniewski has found that within the same occupation, including low-prestige occupations like hospital cleaning staff, some workers experience their work as a calling while others do not, and those who do show markedly better outcomes across multiple dimensions. Job crafting, the active process of modifying the tasks, relationships, and meaning of one's work to better align with one's values and strengths, is one of the most effective interventions for increasing the sense of work as meaningful. The psychology of self-transcendence, experiences in which the ordinary boundaries of the self temporarily dissolve and the person feels deeply connected to something larger, has been studied across religious, spiritual, meditative, psychedelic, and aesthetic contexts. Common features of self-transcendent experiences include a sense of unity with others or with the environment, a decreased focus on the individual self, profound positive emotion including awe and love, a sense of certainty and clarity, and a feeling of encountering something deeply true. These experiences are consistently rated as among the most meaningful of a person's life, and longitudinal research has found that people who report more frequent self-transcendent experiences show greater well-being, greater compassion, and greater openness to change over time. The temporary dissolution of the self, it appears, can be one of the most psychologically enriching things the self experiences. The psychology of rumination, the tendency to repeatedly and passively dwell on distressing thoughts and feelings, is one of the most robust predictors of depression and anxiety. Rumination is distinct from problem-solving or constructive reflection. It involves repetitive focus on symptoms and their possible causes and consequences without movement toward resolution. Susan Nolan-Hoeksema's research found that people who habitually ruminate in response to low mood are significantly more likely to develop major depressive episodes than people who engage in distraction or active problem-solving, and their depressive episodes last longer when they occur. Rumination amplifies and prolongs negative emotion rather than resolving it. Interventions that disrupt rumination through behavioral activation, mindfulness, or physical exercise are among the most effective approaches for reducing the risk of depression. The study of adult neurogenesis, the generation of new neurons in the adult brain, was once considered impossible, as the scientific consensus held that the adult brain was fixed and could only lose neurons, not generate new ones. This consensus was overturned in the 1990s when researchers documented the birth of new neurons in the hippocampus of adult animals, including humans. Hippocampal neurogenesis is promoted by aerobic exercise, environmental enrichment, learning new skills, and certain antidepressant medications. It is suppressed by chronic stress, alcohol, and sleep deprivation. The connection between neurogenesis and mood has led to the proposal that the therapeutic effects of exercise and some antidepressants operate partly through promoting the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus. The adult brain retains a degree of generative capacity that earlier models had entirely missed. The psychology of beauty perception has found that facial attractiveness judgments are made extraordinarily rapidly, within 100 milliseconds of seeing a face, and are highly consistent across observers. The features associated with facial attractiveness include symmetry, averageness. Faces close to the population average are generally rated as more attractive, and features associated with health and genetic fitness. Cross-cultural agreement on facial attractiveness is substantial but not complete. There is a core of universal aesthetic response to faces, but also significant cultural and individual variation. Attractiveness has documented effects on how people are treated by others. Attractive individuals receive better outcomes in hiring, legal proceedings, elections, and social interactions, a phenomenon sometimes called the halo effect, in which positive impressions in one domain generalize to others. The psychology of metacognition, thinking about one's own thinking, is increasingly recognized as a crucial component of learning, emotional regulation, and adaptive behavior. Metacognitive monitoring involves awareness of what you know and do not know, whether your current approach is working, and whether you are understanding what you are reading or hearing. Metacognitive control involves adjusting strategies in response to this monitoring, slowing down when something is difficult, seeking clarification, switching strategies when the current one is failing. Research has found that metacognitive accuracy, the ability to accurately assess one's own performance, is a significant predictor of learning outcomes, independent of intelligence. Students who know when they know and when they do not know are better positioned to allocate study effort where it is most needed. The psychology of curiosity has distinguished between two forms: perceptual curiosity, triggered by something unexpected or discrepant, which motivates exploration to resolve the discrepancy, and epistemic curiosity, a broader desire for knowledge and understanding that motivates sustained inquiry. Both forms share a motivational structure that involves an information gap, the awareness of not knowing something that feels relevant or interesting, and the drive to close that gap. George Lowenstein's information gap theory of curiosity proposes that curiosity is a motivational state similar in some ways to hunger. The gap between what you know and what you want to know creates a felt absence that motivates the seeking of information. Curiosity is consistently associated with greater learning, greater creativity, better academic and professional outcomes, and greater subjective well-being. People who are more curious report richer, more engaging daily lives. The psychology of character development has found that the moral values and ethical commitments people hold are more consistent across contexts than situationist critiques of character once suggested, but less consistent than folk psychology assumes. Research distinguishing genuine character traits from contextual influences finds that people do show consistent tendencies in how they respond to moral dilemmas and opportunities across different situations, but that these tendencies are expressed more or less strongly depending on the situation and can be significantly influenced by seemingly irrelevant situational factors. Making someone feel powerful reduces prosocial behavior. Prompting people to think about being watched increases honest behavior. Being in a hurry reduces helping. Character is real, but it operates in continuous interaction with situation. The experience of solitude, chosen time alone, distinct from loneliness, has been found to have genuine psychological benefits when it is voluntarily entered and is not excessive. Research by Netta Weinstein and others has found that people report feeling calmer, more reflective, and more able to regulate their emotions after periods of chosen solitude. Adolescents who can tolerate and even seek solitude show better adjustment and greater identity development than those who are distressed by being alone. For many people, solitude provides the psychological conditions for the kind of deep self-reflection, creative work, and emotional processing that is difficult in the presence of others. The capacity to be alone well, to be with oneself without anxiety or emptiness, is a developmental achievement with significant implications for psychological autonomy and well-being. The neuroscience of anticipation has found that the anticipation of a reward often activates the brain's reward system more powerfully than the reward itself. The dopaminergic response to cues predicting a reward can exceed the response to the reward when it arrives, particularly when the reward is familiar and predictable. This is part of why wanting something can be more intensely pleasurable than having it, and why the hours before a holiday, a concert, or a reunion are often saturated with a quality of excitement that the event itself sometimes fails to match. The anticipatory system evolved to motivate approach behavior, to drive organisms toward resources before they have them, and it is calibrated to be robustly responsive to signals of upcoming reward. The anticipatory pleasure of looking forward to something is not simply a pale substitute for the real experience. For the brain's reward system, it is often the main event. The psychology of moral development, traced through the work of Jean Piaget and Lawrence Kohlberg, and subsequently extended by Carol Gilligan, Jonathan Haidt, and others, has revealed that moral reasoning is not a single faculty, but a complex interplay of intuition, emotion, and deliberate reasoning. Jonathan Haidt's social intuitionist model proposes that moral judgments are typically made first through rapid intuitive processes and only afterward supported, or occasionally overridden, by deliberate reasoning. The reasoning that follows a moral judgment is often more like post hoc rationalization than genuine deliberation. This model helps explain the phenomenon of moral dumbfounding. People who judge an act as wrong but cannot articulate a coherent reason why when pressed. The feeling of wrongness comes first. The reason is sought afterward. The foundation of everyday moral life is intuitive rather than rational, though reason can and sometimes does revise intuition. The psychology of self-expansion theory, developed by Arthur and Elaine Aron, proposes that people are motivated to expand the self, to incorporate new resources, perspectives, and identities, and that close relationships are one of the most powerful vehicles for this expansion. When we enter a close relationship with another person, we gradually incorporate their perspectives, their knowledge, and their characteristics into our own self-concept. This is one reason why the early stages of romantic love are experienced with such intensity. The rapid incorporation of a new person into the self produces a genuine expansion of identity that is intrinsically rewarding. It also explains why the loss of a close relationship is experienced as something like a loss of part of the self, which, in a psychological sense, it is. Research on the relationship between physical health behaviors and psychological well-being has found a striking bidirectionality. Not only does psychological well-being improve health behaviors, but health behaviors directly improve psychological well-being through biological mechanisms. Regular aerobic exercise is one of the most effective interventions for depression, with effect sizes comparable to antidepressant medication in multiple meta-analyses. Exercise increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which supports neuronal health and neurogenesis. It reduces inflammatory markers. It improves sleep quality. It reduces cortisol responses to stress. The same behaviors that improve physical health, exercise, sleep, diet, time and nature, also improve the biological substrate of psychological well-being through overlapping and mutually reinforcing mechanisms. The concept of psychological flexibility, the ability to contact the present moment fully and without unnecessary defense, and to persist or change behavior in the service of chosen values, has emerged from acceptance and commitment therapy as a transdiagnostic psychological resource. Psychological flexibility involves accepting difficult thoughts and feelings without struggling against them or allowing them to determine behavior. Maintaining awareness of the present moment rather than being caught in rumination or worry. Holding thoughts lightly rather than treating them as literal truths, and connecting with values to guide action. Research has found that psychological flexibility is associated with better outcomes across a wide range of psychological difficulties, and its absence, psychological inflexibility, characterized by experiential avoidance and cognitive fusion, is a transdiagnostic factor in depression, anxiety, chronic pain, and other conditions. The psychology of death awareness, the awareness of one's own mortality, is, according to terror management theory, a fundamental source of psychological motivation that influences a wide range of human behaviors. The theory proposes that humans are uniquely aware of their mortality, and that this awareness generates existential terror that is managed through cultural worldviews that provide a sense of symbolic immortality through religion, legacy, group membership, and cultural values. When mortality is made salient, when people are reminded that they will die, they show increased defense of their cultural worldviews, increased hostility toward those who challenge those worldviews, and increased investment in status and meaning-providing activities. Terror management theory has generated hundreds of studies and has been remarkably generative as a framework for understanding the motivational underpinnings of culture, religion, and intergroup conflict. The psychology of post-decision dissonance, the discomfort experienced after making an irreversible choice, typically resolves through a process in which the chosen option is gradually remembered as better than it appeared before the choice, and the rejected option as worse. This psychological immune system, as Daniel Gilbert calls it, operates largely automatically and outside conscious awareness. People are remarkably good at finding ways to feel satisfied with the choices they have made, at constructing narratives in which the chosen path was the right one, and at discounting the value of roads not taken. This process protects well-being, but can also impair learning from mistakes and reduce the accuracy of retrospective evaluations of past decisions. The study of wisdom, defined in psychological research as expert knowledge about the fundamental pragmatics of life, combined with uncertainty tolerance, perspective-taking, and integration of emotion and reason, has found that it is not simply a consequence of aging. Although wisdom tends to increase gradually through adulthood, it requires active engagement with challenging life experiences and deliberate reflection on those experiences. Paul Baltas and colleagues found that wisdom-related knowledge peaks in the 50s and 60s and then remains relatively stable rather than declining with age. People who have experienced and processed significant life challenges, loss, failure, moral complexity, and who have developed the capacity to hold multiple perspectives and tolerate uncertainty tend to show higher wisdom. The relationship between suffering and wisdom is not automatic, but under the right conditions, adversity, reflected upon, becomes one of the most reliable pathways to genuine psychological depth. The science of what makes human life worth living is still young, and many of its most important questions remain open. The nature of consciousness, the deep mechanisms of creativity, the full account of how early experience shapes adult development, the relationship between biology and culture in determining psychological outcomes. These are questions that psychology has illuminated but not yet answered. What the science has established clearly is that the mind is not what common sense suggests it is, not a transparent window on reality, not a faithful recorder of experience, not a rational deliberator in full control of its choices. It is something more interesting, more surprising, and more capable of wonder than that. A system of extraordinary complexity whose workings are only beginning to be understood, and whose capacity for growth, change, and meaning is, as far as the evidence goes, essentially without limit. And so, near the end of this quiet journey, the many pieces can be allowed to settle together. Memory, attention, emotion, motivation, relationship, language, sleep, meaning, wisdom, each has its own science, but none exists alone. They form the living weather of a human mind, the mind that has been listening tonight, the mind that is even now growing quiet and slow, the mind whose thoughts are beginning to soften and drift, is the most complex and the most extraordinary object in the known universe. There is nothing else anywhere in the cosmos that does what it does, feels what it feels, wonders what it wonders. Take care of it. Rest it well. It has earned tonight. Sleep well. Good night.